Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Friday, October the 16th. My name is Michelle Pickford. I'm your Professional Development Coordinator for the Southern Maryland Regional Office. We welcome you to the SMRO EVV Go Live check-in. Today's presenter will be Ian Collins, our program consultant. Chiming in along with him may be others that answer the questions, such as our SMRO team, as well as ISAS division, and some others from headquarters as well. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode, meaning that you guys will be able to hear us, but you won't be able to directly communicate with us. In order to communicate with us, please feel free to look into the control panel on your right and utilize the questions chat box to type in all of your questions there. We will answer those questions throughout the presentation. There's also handouts for this webinar, and they can also be found to the right of your screen in the control panel under handouts as well. If you have any issues downloading those or you have issues accessing those, feel free to email me and I will email those to you on request. With that being said, I will introduce Ian Collins. Good afternoon, Ian.
Thanks, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. Want to thank everyone for joining us today. As Michelle said, my name is Ian Collins, and I'm a program consultant that works with the DDA team. And so we really wanted to take today to do two things. First, we wanted to provide some very quick updates from the DDA team to explore how the progress is going on our transition to EVV for personal support. And then the second thing we wanted to do, and this is where we want to spend a chunk of our time, is to answer any questions that the DDA community may have about the transition. So we know that we shared a lot of information with people going live on 10.1, and we want to make sure that we provide those same supports to everybody that's going live for 11.1. So just a quick note on the format. As you'll see, if I jump to slide number 2, we have some agenda items. I know this looks like a long list, but we're not going to spend too long going through slides. But I will note that after we complete each section, we'll stop for questions on those specific topics. And then I will be monitoring the chat, and I will direct any questions that we receive to the people that we have on the phone. And we have a good plethora of folks from both the regional office and from DDA headquarters and from our ISAS team that are here to answer any questions that folks may have. Once we get through the slides and we get to item number 7, the Q&A, we'll open up the floor again for any questions on any topics that we covered in items 1 through 6, as well as just any questions that we may not have covered. And as Michelle said, I'll just encourage folks to go and look at the handout that we've provided. It's just a PDF of the slides that we've gone through. And as you'll notice, as we're going through the slides, there are certain links there that will take you to certain resources and tools. And so, if you want to go to them live, you have that opportunity, or if you want to look at them later, we just encourage you to download those now so that you have access to them later. And as Michelle said, if you need these later, we can email them out to you. So on the agenda today, we're going to hit personal supports and supported living go live dates. Second, we're going to go through LTSS Maryland training for providers on both of those services. Next, we're going to hit on the other resources and tools that we have for our stakeholders and where to access them. We're then going to move into talking about person-centered plans and how the approval process is going for all of our folks going live on 11.1. We're going to touch briefly on OTP device distribution, and then we're just going to talk through a few updates that we have from our 10.1 Go Live milestones so that we can share some of the lessons learned that we've had from that process so that the 11.1 Go Live milestone goes even better. And then again, we'll open it up for Q&A after that. So I'm going to talk us through some of the first slides. So first, I'm going to jump to the personal supports and supported living go live dates. And this really should be a refresher for most folks on the phone. But just wanted to give a quick reminder that for personal support, any provider that operates in the Eastern Shore and Western Shore went live on 10.1. Any provider that operates in the Southern region goes live 11.1. And any provider that operates in the Central region will be going live in 12.1 in about 6 weeks. Supported living looks a little bit similar, but we're starting the supported living roll in a little bit later. So our Eastern Shore, Western, and Southern providers are going to go live on 11.1, and our central providers that provide supported living are going to go live on 12/1. So just as a quick reminder, for providers that operate across multiple regions, we'll go live in LTSS Maryland with the region that goes live at the latest date. So for example, if I worked at a provider that operated in the Western region, the Southern region, and Central region for personal support services, my provider agency would go live on the latest date, which in this instance is the Central region, on December 1st, 2020. So before we keep moving, I'm going to pause here and see, are there any questions about the logistics of the go live dates for either personal supports or supported living? And I'll pause here and just monitor the chat and see if we have anything.
No questions at the moment, Ian.
Okay, and like I said, we will, I will pause for questions at every sort of section of our deck, but then again, we're going to open things up again a little bit later for our final Q&A session. So I'm going to keep us moving here to talk a little bit about LTSS Maryland training for providers. So as I said, if folks are able to access the handout, which you can download from the GoToWebinar interface, you'll be able to access the link to DDA's online training calendar, which you can also access by going to DDA's website. And so just wanted to give a quick update on the provider portal billing training for LTSS EVV billing function. So that's going to be, that is actually has been running and is ongoing for EVV billing training. So if you'll see actually down here, for fiscal staff at provider agencies, October trainings, which are going on now, we are limiting fiscal staff provider agencies to Eastern, Western, and Southern providers. Really what we should say there is we're giving preference to those providers so that anybody that may have missed earlier in September in Eastern and Western have an opportunity to get caught up. And so that all of our Southern providers that want the opportunity to come and learn how to bill for EVV are able to do that prior to 11/1. And then as we start to focus on our 12/1 milestone, we're going to invite all of our providers from Eastern, Western, Southern, and Central to attend our online EVV billing trainings. And again, we're limiting that to fiscal staff currently for any provider that provides personal supports. Now, as we're going live with supported living, we had to acknowledge that we needed to provide non-EVV billing training specifically for supported living, and those training dates are listed here below. So on October 27th and 28th, Eastern, Western, and Southern providers will be invited to attend our supported living training, which will also be held online. And then our November 17th and 19th trainings will be specifically for SMRO providers prior to their 12/1 go live date. And so let me go ahead and pause there. Are there questions that we have regarding logistics for LTSS Maryland training for providers, either EVV billing training for personal support provider agencies or supported living billing training for any other provider agencies that provide that service? So it looks like we have one question here, and that comes from Rick. The question is, are the EVV billing trainings recorded? That's a good question for that one. I will pass it to Chioma Ani, who is our LTSS director.
Rick, for that question, the trainings as they are set up right now, that one is not recorded, but there are pre-recorded webinars that are already available and have been for a little while on the LTSS Maryland page. So if you go to the DDA webpage, into the LTSS Maryland tab and click on training videos, you will see a list of, I believe there's 6 different short webinars that review various aspects of EVV billing functionality. So that should be more than sufficient. It covers all aspects of that for your agency to review.
Thank you, Chioma. We actually have another slide here on resources for stakeholders. So please go ahead and continue to submit any questions that you may have around provider training, but I'm just going to hit on a couple other resources that we have available to DDA stakeholders. So the first is for people and families, we're going to have a webinar on October 28th to walk them through what the EVV process will look like for them. We had one last month for our 10/1 go live date, and we're going to repeat the same process on October 28th. There's a link to register in the slide deck, which we encourage folks to use to register. You can also find registration for that on DDA's website in the training calendar. And then we're going to show you all where we have started to link many of our EVV resources, which we're calling our EVV toolkit, but wanted to note that there are a couple essential items that we've provided to CCS agencies. One is on the presentation on EVV and OTP management, which we have linked in our slide deck, as well as our CCS ISAS guide. There are additional resources for CCS agencies that we'll show in a second, but those are the two sort of heavy hitters that provide a lot of information. And then the final thing that we wanted to flag for our providers and for our direct service professionals is that we've opened up our practice EVV line. That's been open since mid-September. And really what it does is it allows the provider direct support professional to get used to the clock in, clock out process. And we know that because this is a new operational system, it's just a good opportunity for folks to practice the cadence of dialing a phone number and then putting in the essential information to make sure that the claim is created correctly in the system. And so that practice EVV line for DSPs will be open until mid-January of 2021. So that if you have new DSPs coming onto your team, they'll have an opportunity to practice with that until mid-January of 2021. And the link there takes you to sort of the background information that you would need to be able to access the EVV line for DSPs. And so I referenced this a second ago, but we've been calling the EVV toolkit. That's really the place where we're taking information and putting it on our website so that folks can go and find everything in sort of a one-stop shop. So if you go to Google and you type in DDA EVV, it'll be the first thing that pops up. Or if you go to DDA's homepage, you'll see this black bar at the top and you can click EVV. That will take you right there. If we go back to the question that Rick asked, which was a good one that Chioma answered, if you're looking for the EVV webinars, you can go to LTSS Maryland, and within that sub page, you'll be able to find webinars regarding EVV billing. So we encourage folks to continue to go to this page. It's going to be our hub for information, and we developed that in partnership with CCS agencies, with the pilot group that has been piloting LTSS Maryland since December of last year, and with other providers to get a sense of what are the types of supports that are needed within the community so that everybody is able to make this a smooth transition. So it looks like we have a couple questions in our chat box. So I'm going to open these up and assign them to certain folks. First question from Cynthia is, if we have taken the billing training for personal supports, is there enough of a difference that we also need to take the supported living training? It's a great question. Chioma, do you mind if I pass that one to you?
Sure. So the general overview that is gone through in the EVV billing training, and how to navigate and how entries work and services and claims and the difference between all of those. So that is the same. But non-EVV services have a slightly different module in the system for entering the information. It's pretty self-explanatory. So if you've attended the EVV training, you may be able to figure it out without attending the supported living training. But if you feel that that's something that may be helpful for you, then I would recommend that you attend the supported living training. The supported living training is operated differently than the EVV training was. It's going to be a live webinar and mostly demo, not as much hands-on as you were able to do in the EVV billing training.
Okay, Jim, I have another training question for you, which is from Michael that says, I'm registered for the 1019 training, but have yet to receive the login link. Can you let us know when the link will be shared?
That and
Hi, Ian. This is Tolu. Michael, you should get a Zoom link today before the close of business.
That's great. Thanks, Tolu. All right, it looks like we have a couple OTP questions. So I'm going to introduce Joey Waldman, who's a member of our ISS team. Joey, a couple questions for you, and these relate to the EVV practice line. Is the practice line connected to the training database? It looks like one provider had an issue where the employee social security number was not recognized. Can any role provide direct support for personal support?
Yeah, so the training line is connected and will receive the staff provider's social security number. However, there is I believe, a 2-week lag about. So if you add the staff today into the live system, you won't see them in the training IVR until about 2 weeks. But I believe the practice guide that we distributed to providers has some information, test SSN that you can use. And so if staff want to practice, they can use that fake ID to use that practice line.
Great. And Joey, one other question about the practice line. If your participant requires an OTP device, can you use the practice line without an OTP device if they have not yet received their OTP from the CCS agency?
Yes, I believe there should also be a methodology for doing that within the practice guide we distributed as well. So if you need to practice an OTP device and you don't have one assigned, then I would look at the guide and use the information that's provided there.
Okay, great. And it looks like we also have a recommendation here from Rick that says, it seems like the practice line has been a useful support, and it seems like Rick is recommending that we consider extending the practice line beyond sort of that January date, as staff will find it beneficial for using the practice line without any sort of fear for repercussions when errors are made. So we will definitely take that under consideration.
Yep, that's good feedback to have. I think it's something to keep bringing up, especially towards the January date. I think we can consider an extension, but we'll have to evaluate based on the need that we feel that providers have.
Joey, I have another question here for you in a second, but would just continue to encourage folks to put any questions in the chat regarding resources or any other sort of tools that may be helpful. This question is from Rick. Joey, it says, is it true that it may take up to 3 weeks after the client receives their OTPs for the serial number to become recognized by the training line?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Were they asking
Yeah,
just for confirmation it'll be 2 weeks?
So the question is it true that it may take up to 3 weeks after the client receives their OTP for the serial number to become recognized by the training line?
Yes, that is true. So similar to the social security number, it would take about 2 to 3 weeks for that to be in sync. And so in the meantime, you can use the guide, which has a OTP number that you can use.
Great, thanks, Joey. Okay, I think we've hit all of our questions here. And again, if people have more questions regarding resources or tools that are available, please continue to put them in the chat and we can answer them a little bit later too. Okay, so with that, just want to turn our attention to the person-centered plan process. And just want to note that the DDA regional offices have been really closely tracking personal support participants and their PCPs to ensure that each plan is active, approved, and effective as of the appropriate go-live date. Our Eastern and Western Shore regional offices worked very closely with CCSs and providers going into the 10/1 date, and our Eastern, Western, and Southern offices are continuing to work very closely with CCSs and providers to ensure that everybody is ready to go as of the go-live date. And so we're tracking very closely to that. The one recommendation that we continue to make if you're encountering any issues in the submission process is to coordinate very closely with your partners in the process. So providers with CCSs, CCSs with providers, and with your regional offices so that we can help troubleshoot any sort of issues that you may have or come across in the PCP planning process. So before we keep moving, are there issues or questions that folks have regarding PCPs that our team can answer? Today we do have Anesta Duke on the line, as well as members of the DDA headquarters team that can help take some of these on. We'll just give 30 seconds here to see if we have any questions come in around PCPs. Okay, Chioma, I think this PCP question would actually go to you. The question is from Jenny is, will all PCPs need to be done again?
So the short answer is no. It's unlikely that all PCPs that were previously done need to be done again. But if there are things that need to be updated in that PCP that was previously approved, then it will be revised and that PCP will be approved or will be reviewed again and subsequently approved. So if there are things that need to be changed or that need to be updated for services for that individual, then the PCP will be going through that process.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chioma. Then I will keep us moving. Last slide that I will present is just around OTP device distribution. So wanted to give just a quick update on how that process has gone. Wanted to let folks know that at this point, all of the OTPs have been distributed from the MDH team to CCS agencies. We had one organization that needed to do sort of an expedited pickup, but those have gone out about as of 3 or 4 weeks ago now. So CCS agencies have a couple options in terms of how to distribute OTPs to participants. They can do it either via, in-person delivery, or if they feel more comfortable delivering via mail, that's also an option. And all CCS agencies will be reimbursed for OTP delivery activities. Now, we do know that there have been some delays in delivery of OTPs. But again, we'll get to this in a second when we talk a little bit about our lessons learned from the 10/1 go live date. There are still some things that can be done if your participant does not have an OTP. Mainly, we can bill using manual time entry in that instance. So the system will very much carry on if an OTP isn't in someone's hands as of 11/1. But given the amount of time that CCS agencies have had, we expect that all 11/1 participants will have an OTP by that date. But we do know that there's a lot going on with the mail system currently. So it's something that we're continuing to monitor. Please reach out if you have questions and let us know if you have questions now about any how to use OTP devices or concerns around distribution or anything like that, and we can answer those now. Okay, Joey, a question for you. Actually, a couple questions. Will there be a limit on manual entries or unlimited for a period while EVV is getting rolled out?
That's a good question. A few people have asked that even this morning. So we have been talking about implementing a kind of grace period for providers so that you will not be held to the 6 missing time limit. We were expecting to put out guidance on that in the next week or so. But for now, the expectation is that you would not be held to that because we understand that there's a bit of a learning curve and it takes some time for you and your staff to get acclimated to the system. So when we send out that guidance, we'll announce the full duration of that grace period, but just know that for now you should be okay. So what you will see for missing time requests or manual entries you put in is that some of them may be assigned points for the penalty, and that's because there's some automation built in the system. And what happens is when you reach the limit, our team will go in and make sure that the payment still goes through.
Joey, another question here, which is, could you speak a little bit to the resources needed to correct a missed clock in or clock out by a DSP? Or what that process would look like?
Yeah, so that process would basically look like if your DSP misses a clock in or clock out, they should let your agency administrators or the billing staff know. And I think agencies have approached that task in a few different ways. And I believe we in the DDA have put out some guidance and some suggestions from providers we've collected along the way in this process. But once that notification is sent to the agency administrator, it should hopefully let them know, hey, on this day and at this time, I missed a clock in or clock out. Then the administrator or billing staff can log into the provider portal and they will be able to enter those times manually into the system. So they would either be entering a full shift if there's nothing existing, or they can find the partial shift that was entered and then close it out.
Great, thanks, Joey. For this next question, I'm going to introduce a new member of the DDA team, our Director of Federal Programs, Rhonda Workman. Rhonda, we have a question here that says, or that asks, will it be possible for personal supports to be delivered virtually for families who prefer this option due to the COVID environment?
So that's a great question. And yes, personal supports is available to be provided remotely. We had received federal approval to do that, so that is one of the service options.
Great, thank you, Rhonda. Joey, a couple more questions here for you. How many EVV corrections per month per staff will be permitted?
I think tying back to a previous question, under normal circumstances, each month, one staff, an individual staff will be allowed up to 6 corrections. So that's clock-ins or clock-outs, each count as 1. But for the next few months, we are going to be offering a grace period for agencies since this whole process is new to you. And so we'll be releasing guidance soon on what that will look like and how long it would extend.
Okay, thanks, Joey. Chioma, I think this question should go to you, which is, will providers be notified when OTP devices are delivered? And I'm assuming that means delivered to families and participants.
So that should be part of the coordination between CCSs and providers. DDA is not, tracking or able to know if a specific participant received their token and on what day. But please, providers should coordinate with CCS agencies and CCS agencies to coordinate and communicate with providers to ensure that the person is ready for their go live on 11/1.
Thank you, Choma. Choma, I think I'm going to stick with you for this next question, but then Rhonda, you may have something to add on top of this, which is, you know, if virtual personal supports are provided, how will the clock in, clock out process work? You know, even if someone has an OTP or doesn't have an OTP, what is that going to look like? So, Choma, I think let's start with you there.
Sure. So you see there are a number of related questions around virtual supports and entering the information into the system. So the clock in, clock out process uses, you know, the phone, either the participant's phone or another phone that is paired with an OTP device. Now, obviously, if you're rendering virtual services, you're not physically with the person, so you would neither have access to their phone nor to their OTP, which stays with them or in their home. With that being the case, you would have to make those entries as manual entries, manual billing entries into the system. If you refer back to the resources that Ian mentioned earlier on the DDA website, under the EVV section, under provider details, you will see what is called the service modification guide that was created and put together by our ISAS team. That guide includes the details on how to enter service entries into the system when you are providing services virtually. There is specific wording and language that has to be used in the system so that the ISAS team can appropriately identify that it is a virtual service that was rendered. When that is checked into the system, it will not count against, as the guide mentions, it will not count against the provider or DSP's 6 manual entries for the month. So in order to ensure that you have the appropriate process outlined, please refer to the service modification guide that is posted, and that provides all the details that you would need to know how to appropriately bill for services that are rendered virtually.
Ian, I have nothing to add to that.
Okay, great. All right, just making sure we hit every question that folks added. Joey, another question around manual time entry. What's the time limit for manual time entries surrounding when the service was rendered?
That's also a good question. In the ISS policies that should be posted on the DDA website, that is described there, but the time limit will be 2 business days after the end of the month. And so providers should keep that in mind as they are working with their DSPs to enter those manual entries. And again, similar to the 6 manual entry limit, we understand that you all are still getting used to this process, so we will be offering the same grace period for that.
Okay, thanks, Joey. Just taking a look at a couple more questions. Okay, this is a bit of a long one, so let me read it and then we can assign. So the question says, in our agency, the program coordinators handle fixing the day-to-day DSP issues, such as the fixing of clock in, clock out issues. I had originally assigned my program coordinators to the provider program staff role, but this means that they cannot make any modifications. Do any other providers have suggestions how to best set the role up? So Becky, that's a good question. I'll keep that one open for others to respond to in the chat, and if other ideas come in there, I will definitely read those out. So again, the question there is really how to best set up staff roles within LTSS Maryland to make sure that it's it's manageable to fix any sort of clock in, clock out issues that come up.
Becky, a little insight there. So as I believe you've noted, program staff role cannot manage any billing related items. They would need a billing role to do that. Part of what some providers did who were part of the pilot is maybe have a interim person or someone who sits in the middle of all those processes. So that may be an idea if you want your program staff to report or share that information with a specific person who does have a billing staff role in the system, and that person could be the one responsible for completing the entries in the system or making any adjustments that need to be made. But in order to do any billing related functions, one would need a billing provider role in LTSS.
Okay, I'm going to keep us moving here. I do see a couple additional questions that I'm going to save for the end, which are good ones. So Chioma, I think I'm going to turn it over to you for our updates from our 10.1 Go Live. So again, these are sort of our lessons learned so far from the process.
Sure. So data as of yesterday, we have just a little under 300 participants who have had at least one service delivered with a successful clock in and clock out pair. And that is across 21 agencies between both Eastern and Western regions. So we also have a number of providers who completed manual service entries for those missed clock-ins and outs. So some providers who maybe had issues with the clock-in process or DSPs were not able to get all the way through and needed some additional training. Providers have been completing manual service entries on those services that were rendered. We just talked about remote services and the impact on service delivery. So for remote services, I know as we went through, we talked about how you would be able to enter that into the system. But there are some participants, as we found, who are not receiving personal support services at all, neither remote nor in person. So they are currently on hold due to COVID concerns. Either the family or the person is not comfortable with receiving services and they are not interested or able to do those services remotely. So with that, as you prep for the 11.1 Go Live, it's still important to ensure that that person has a completed PCP in the system in case their service delivery needs change anytime soon. So the region will be working through that with you all and prioritizing accordingly. But we wanted to stress that even for people who may not be receiving services as of today, we want to make sure their PCP is updated and they're ready to go in case that changes. Any questions there? Okay. So just some lessons learned so far as we are tracking the data from the 10.1 milestone. We would highly recommend that DSPs use the practice line. I know we talked about that a little bit earlier, so that you can have the DSPs get used to the call prompts. Some people feel that they go by quickly if you're not paying attention, but if you listen to it a couple times, it gets easier to recognize when to enter what specific information. DSP should keep the provider MA number handy when clocking in or out. There are additional tools that were shared on the EVV toolkit on the website that include a printable card that your agency can print to enter and write out the provider MA number so that DSPs have access to that. And it's a wallet-sized card. We highly recommend something like that is done or utilized by your DSPs so they have continual access to that MA number. Agency admin should also ensure that all DSPs have a staff provider profile in LTSS. Some of the issues that we noted with the 10.1 group is that some DSPs did not have a completed profile or didn't have a profile set up at all. So their clock in and clock out was throwing errors in that process. So provider agency admin should ensure that all their DSPs have a staff provider role in LTSS. And provider billing staff starting from day one on 11/1 should review and start tracking billing information. Again, as we've talked about, we understand this is a learning process for everyone, but the sooner that billing staff are able to start looking at that, the more quickly you can ask questions if you have any questions and be able to make corrections in the system to adjust the entries appropriately. If you have any questions that come up in that process, the ISAS team's email is what's listed there, mdh.isashelp@maryland.gov. Please feel free to reach out to the ISAS team and they can provide additional guidance or information as you need. So, but overall, as DSPs adapt to using the system, it's important to remind them to clock in and out. If they miss one or forget to do so, they should follow up and document that and share that with the appropriate agency staff. So even if they have a little difficulty, let's say they tried the first time and got stuck, they can always hang up and try again to make sure they get all the way through. And in that process, as we continue to track, or the system tracks the entries, that record of the service that is provided is listed there in LTSS. So if there's ever anything that needs to be fixed or payments that need to be adjusted, we at least have the record of service as far as EVV is concerned in the system to be able to address appropriately. So I know that was a number of different types of topics that I just went through. And Ian, we can stop there and answer some additional questions.
Okay, looks like we do have a couple questions. All right, Joey, this question will start with you, which is, can a person who may be using their phone for EVV decide to change later to be able to use the OTP instead?
Sure. That would be up to the individual receiving services and the CCS. So there's a handful of circumstances where typically an OTP will be assigned, and that's if a phone is not available, if the person is state funded and doesn't have an MA number, if they're constantly receiving services in the community, and so it's hard to have an accessible landline, or if there's no phone service in general. But if the individual receiving services feels very strongly that they do not want to have their personal phone be used, say they change their mind in 2 months and they just feel like it's something they definitely don't want to do anymore, then they should speak to their CCS. If they tell you that, then I would let the CCS know. And then the CCS can work with them to assign an OTP and figure out if that's the most appropriate path forward.
Okay, Joey, another question for you, which is, has MDH considered a system where ISAS and an agency time clock system can work together, or where the time from ISAS can be uploaded into other time clock systems to eliminate the staff having to clock in, clock out into multiple systems?
So no, that's not something we would really be proceeding with, at least at this time. So yeah, the expectation is that the staff would always be using the ISAS system. And right now we don't have another option for that. Providers do have access to a number of reports in the system. And with providers that we've had using ISAS since we started it, some of them have used those reports to configure their own systems and upload them, or have their staff use them to help track times and use that to figure out kind of how those manual entries need to be entered and track the claims as they get paid.
Okay. We have a couple questions here about the service modification guide. So there's one question here about how to access the service modification guide. So I'm just going to show folks very quickly. So if I'm going to pull up a new browser. If you type DVA EVV into your browser and click the first thing that comes up, or follow the link that we have provided in our deck, this will take you to our EVV homepage. And what you'll see here, right, is an introduction, our memos and correspondences, our at-a-glance documents, our frequently asked questions, which we're going to continue to update over time. And then you see a toolkit by stakeholders. The service modification guide is underneath provider leadership, can be found here. It's the third bullet down. If you click into it, it'll take you right to it. Now, I think we had another question around this. Joey, the question on the service modification guide is, does the guide address situations when the provider uses a staffing agency to fill in for the service delivery?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
Yep, sure. The question is, does the service modification guide address situations when the provider uses a staffing agency to fill in?
I believe there is something there that there's a reason for new or substitute staff, but the expectation is that if you have a staffing agency that's filling in, that they would still use the ISAS system to clock in and out. And so providers, if they have some staff that are kind of on the bench ready to go out whenever needed, then we would recommend that you add them to the system as in the staff provider role. And that way, once they go out to somebody's home to provide service, they can just clock in and out with no problem. But otherwise, yes, they would have to do it. And if you don't have them in time and have to do a manual entry, then you would just enter the associated reason.
Okay, Joey, a couple more questions for you. How many phone numbers can be associated with each person receiving services?
So each person receiving services can have a number of phone numbers. I don't think there's an upper limit. If there is, it's pretty high. So the individual, if they have multiple phone lines that may be used, they would just work with their CCS to make sure all of those phone lines are enabled for the ISAS IVR system. And I think it's just a good point to make that staff provider phones should not be listed on that profile to use the IVR system, even if they are a relative or somebody who may need to have their phone number in the participant's profile just for tracking purposes. The CCS should not be enabling those numbers for the IVR. But otherwise, landlines or cell phones that belong to the participant can be used, multiples at once.
Okay, a similar question along those lines, Joey, which is, how does this work for individuals who receive CFC and personal supports at the same time? Should they use OTP for one service and the phone for the other? Or if a CCS assigns an OTP for personal supports, would it affect CFC?
If a OTP device is assigned for personal supports and they also receive CFC, then that OTP device can be used for both services. Each participant can only have one OTP assigned at a given time. And so the staff providers for each service type should be calling into the appropriate phone line, but they can use the same OTP device.
Okay. Joey, one more question for you, which is, what if the client prefers not to have staff use their MA number when using ISAS?
If the participant's phone is used, then the MA number is not required because it should validate based on that. But if there is an OTP device available, then the OTP serial number can be used to identify the participant. That OTP serial number is unique and it's tied to an individual person. And so the system is able to track that number to the individual receiving services.
And Joey, can you talk about if an employee is concerned about their social security number, can you talk a little bit about how the LTSS Maryland system will protect their information?
Sure. So the ISAS system is encrypted for data in transit and at rest. So that means, as it is transferred from the IVR to the LTSS Maryland and provider portal system, the data is encrypted, and while it's stored, it's encrypted. So our system is compliant with all IT security standards. We're compliant with do-it policies for IT security. And I think it's important to keep in mind that we definitely understand the concern about social security numbers, but our system does have a lot of sensitive information, including PHI and PII for Medicaid recipients. And so all of that data is secured in a way that will help us ensure that that private information does not get anywhere.
Okay, want to note for folks that Chioma sent a message to answer this question, but the question was, is there a limit to how many admin providers or how many billing providers an agency has in LTSS Maryland? And the answer to that question is there currently is not a staffing limit per agency in LTSS Maryland. So there's no limit to the number of admin providers you can have or to the number of billing provider staff you can have. Okay, Rhonda, we have another question for you related to the Appendix K. This question is, under Appendix K, personal support clients have temporarily been permitted to participate in small groups. How can that be managed for billing? So for example, if there's one staff with 3 personal support participants.
I am not familiar with what you're referring to for Appendix K that says people in personal supports can participate in small groups. So if you could share with the
This is
chat or
Patricia.
send.
I think what we need to remember that is personal supports is a one-on-one service, so there's really not share any type of services together.
Yes, if you have some reference material, if you want to email that to me, I'm happy to look into further.
Chioma, it sounds like there may be some clarification needed where the training stated that EVV billing mentioned, the EVV billing training mentioned that each provider agent or each agency could have no more than 5 administrative providers. Can you clarify that based on what we just shared in our chat?
I don't believe that is correct, but I will confirm with the trainers to ensure that the right information is being shared. I don't recall that there are any limits for staffing at agencies.
Okay. I will pause here to see if other questions come in. We really appreciate all of these questions. They're very, very good. I think we've hit the majority of them. So we're going to take a pause here and see if others come in. We want to make sure that everybody leaves here feeling like they have the information they need. Just as a refresher for folks, the things that we really covered today included, the Go Live plan for providers and participants by service line, so both by person support and supported living. We talked about LTSS Maryland training for stakeholders, resources and tools that are available to everyone, updates from our 10-1 Go Live milestone, and then we talked a little bit about OTP device distribution and person-centered plans. So if there are other questions related to those topics or anything related to other things that are on your mind, please go ahead and chat those in now and we'll get them answered. Okay, we have one more from Steve that says, is there a limit to the number of hours a DSP can provide services consecutively in ISAS? So Joey, I think I'll pass that one to you. Again, the question is there a limit to the number of hours a DSP can provide services consecutively in ISAS?
Yes, sorry, I was having trouble with my mute button. I believe there is a limit of 24 hours that will trigger an exception. But I mean, generally would not expect a single service to go that far, given that, providers will need to rest in order to provide appropriate services to the individual.
Great, thank you, Joey. So it looks like our questions have tapered off, and I also want to acknowledge that we are at our 1 hour limit here. So with that, I think we are going to go ahead and sign off for today. Please keep in mind that we will be having similar webinars following our 11/1 Go Live date so that we can troubleshoot any issues that folks are dealing with, once we start to go live in the system for all of our 11/1 providers. Want to thank everyone for joining us today. Please be in contact with your regional office if you have additional questions, and we will be continuing to update the information that we provide on the DDA website. So with that, I think we can close out today. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a good one.
Thank you.